In our society, more so than before, we have the tendency and inclination to look for pleasure and satisfaction outside of us. We are constantly looking for the next thing to do, for the next dopamine and adrenaline hit. We are constantly thinking that when we will get X, we will actually feel fulfilled and happy. And this has been going on, of course, for years. This is a natural tendency of the ego. But especially in these days, I feel like we are constantly looking for pleasure to satisfy us, to really fulfill us. And what happens, and what I see around, is that the more we do so, the more empty we feel, because somehow we realize that the object that we were hoping will satisfy us, it doesn't. This is for me really important because I make the difference between authentic pleasure, a pleasure that comes from within, from our own essence and our own bodies, that we don't need to look for, but we can actually find, and synthetic pleasure, that is for me this constant search for something outside of us that will complete us and fulfill us. So today I want to talk about this specific topic, the difference between authentic pleasure and synthetic pleasure, and also how we can tap into authentic pleasure and why it's so important. Because this is not just a search for hedonistic pleasures. This is actually a quest to come back to ourselves in our bodies, here and now. I'm Emela Bear. I'm a sacred sexuality coach, and I help people to connect deeply with their bodies, with their essence, to really go beyond the limitations and blockages that are limiting their erotic expression, as well as the satisfaction that they can find within. Today I want to talk about this authentic pleasure and the difference between that and synthetic pleasure. So that for me is the difference between searching for something and finding something. So as I said before, in our society there's this constant search for more, thinking that one time when we will get the thing that we desire, we'll feel satisfied and complete. We can do that with anything, with objects, with possessions, with experiences, more so now than before. With social media, we can become also addicted to pornography, to drugs. So we can feel this adrenaline and dopamine high. And also we can do that with relationships, where we project the fulfillment onto the other person. And once we are into the relationship for some time, we realize that that is not going to fulfill us. And we start also seeing the negative traits of the other. So what I have seen in my life, in my own experience and with my clients, is that when we look for something and we put the power onto any object, whatever that is, like I said before, possessions or a relationship or a person, we are actually giving our power away. And when we're giving our power away and we're saying, as long as I have this object, I will be happy and I will be fulfilled, this is actually the recipe for failure. So why do I talk about pleasure? Why do I talk about sex? Why do I talk about sacred sexuality? It's not for the mere purpose of having pleasure and hedonistically speaking. That's not the reason I talked about it. That for me would be what I call synthetic pleasure, which means that we are somehow bypassing our nervous system and we're reaching for something outside of us to fulfill us and to get pleasure. So getting pleasure for me is very different than opening to pleasure. And so I want to talk about this difference here. So synthetic pleasure for me is this idea that we bypass our bodies, we don't really synchronize with them, we are not in tune with them, and we have this energy building up that makes us feel that we need to get something in order to feel fulfilled and satisfied. That is for me synthetic pleasure. And most of us, we do that constantly with food, with social media, with relationships. We are constantly thinking that these impulses are there and we need to go get something. And that for me puts the power away from us, puts the power in the object, in the other person, and that doesn't connect with our true essence because it comes from a separation and a misunderstanding of who we really are. In my work and in my classes, I talk about this concept that we are complete beings, that we are divine beings, and that there is nothing missing. There is no lack, there is no separation. But because of many limiting beliefs, because of years and years of misunderstandings about our bodies, about our sexuality, our also wrong ideas about what spirituality is, we are suffering and we are actually in a constant separation because we believe consciously and unconsciously that we are separated from the divine. We're constantly looking for something to complete us. So we reach out and we get. That is actually synthetic pleasure. The other way we can see this is when we connect with authentic pleasure. That is not about getting something from the outside. It's not about bypassing our bodies, but it's actually connecting back with our bodies to really see that pleasure was always there. I believe, this is my experience and also in the philosophy I have studied, that pleasure is inherent to our existence. Our bodies are intrinsically pleasurable and blissful. But many times we cannot see that because we have so many limiting beliefs. We believe sex is dirty. We believe that the body is lower than the spirit, that matter is actually inferior than the spirit. And so, of course, we have traumas in our personal life, we have ancestral suffering, and of course, there is in a more subtle level, the separation and the creation of the illusion of ego. So because of this, we cannot see that actually our bodies are intrinsically blissful. So we try to get something outside of us, but what we're trying to get is always available and present in our own bodies, in our own essence. So this is the whole point about sacred sexuality and sacred relationships and pleasure, that what we're reaching for, it's always within. And of course, we have heard that many times. But here I'm just trying to introduce these two concepts of synthetic pleasure and authentic pleasure to really kind of like see the difference also in energy around that. One is about getting something and bypassing the body. And the other one is coming inside, connecting with the body and finding that within. And that actually helps us to not only be fulfilled, satisfied, and feel pleasure, but that also helps us to regulate our nervous systems and to really rewire our brains in the areas that we have wounds, that we have had trauma. And it's a beautiful way to repattern ourselves for a life of bliss and satisfaction. When we do that, we can also open to reality as it is, in the sense that we can be with things as they are. And so authentic pleasure is not about creating or making pleasure happen. It's about allowing it. And allowing it means to return to our bodies and to be with whatever is present and available there. And sometimes that can be difficult emotions. Sometimes that could be unpleasant sensations. But as long as we are there, at least for 90 seconds, just being present without the stories, we can actually move the energy, and that energy will dissipate, dissolve, or transform. And that will open us more. That will open our capacity and expand our capacity to be with what is. And by doing that many, many times, because this is a practice, we can actually expand our capacity to be with everything in reality. And also we can find that pleasure is always there, somehow available. Like, why then pleasure is always available? Why pleasure is actually inherent to our own existence? Because the way I see things and the way I have studied things in the tantric philosophy is that actually we are emanations of divine energy. We are nothing but that. And if we are emanations of divine energy and reality is intrinsically blissful, we are also blissful. We just cannot experiment that and see it directly with our eyes, because it's like trying to see the sun when it's very cloudy. It's not that the sun is not there, it's that we cannot perceive it because there are clouds. It's the same way. Pleasure is always there, present in our bodies, but we cannot perceive it because we have so many blockages and so many years and years of conditioning, because we cannot recognize who we really are. But once we start actually tapping into truth, into who we really are, unlocking our power, reclaiming our power, synchronizing with our own body, reconnecting with it, finding the authentic pleasure, then we can actually see that is actually obvious, that the thing that we were looking for was never missing or was never outside, that it was always there. That is why I think it's important to describe these two different types of pleasure, because I think many times we have them mistaken. Our nature is blissful, and the more we open to who we are, letting go of limiting beliefs and traumas and suffering, we can actually just open to the possibility of a life where pleasure is our birthright and our daily life is full with it. And it doesn't mean that because I'm talking about pleasure that it's just beautiful and it's joyful and it's always good and all filled with positive emotions. The capacity to feel pleasure also makes us feel capable of being with things that are really uncomfortable, being with the challenges of life. Because life is a mixture of many things, and we cannot just be with one thing and reject the other. The capacity to feel pleasure in our body, by regulating our nervous system, gives us also the capacity to be with the most difficult aspects of us, of others, and of life. So that is why pleasure is such an amazing tool for self-development and spirituality, because at the end, what Tantra is about, if we need to sum up that in a few words, will be to be in full presence of what is. That's it. And that is sacred sexuality, basically. So I thought it was important for me to just share these concepts, because like this, we can actually notice that there is a difference in our bodies, a difference when we get or we find, and we can empower ourselves by really rewiring our brain around pleasure and finding that within. If you like this video, you can subscribe to my channel, you can share it and follow me on social media. And if you're interested in one-on-one mentorships, I have all the information below.